Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seatrade Cruise Talks. Why do we travel? I'm Tal Danai, founder and CEO of ArtLink. How would I introduce this? I like to think of our work at ArtLink, curating the art collections for hotels and cruise ships around the world, as giving stages to the voices of cultures. We think of our work as being culturally sustainable and regenerative. The bottom line of our challenge in every project we're involved in is to create guest experiences that would be meaningful enough to resonate beyond the walls of the hotels and ships they're in. I think that art provides us with alternative ways to think and reflect about ourselves and the world. And we see it our duty to help share it. Practicing this discipline brought me to propose this mini series of talks discussing cultural regeneration and how may we design spaces that promote the cultures they engage with. Interestingly, the first talk concentrates on a question that I would expect to have found discussed in conferences about tourism and travel and cruise ships and so on many times, but I haven't. So this first talk is with Alan Liu, Professor Emeritus, Department of Geography, Planning and Recreation in Northern Arizona University. And you may ask, why am I inviting a geographer to discuss a fundamentally psychological question? Well, before Alan starts, I want to share with you that while researching for this talk, I've read a number of Alan's papers, and I've seen a very interesting development over the years from an academic geographer into a spiritual writer. I don't know if Alan agrees with me or not, but we'll hear it in a second. Nevertheless, I found it a very interesting and unexpected angle or set of angles on this fundamental question for any conference on tourism and travel. So why do we travel? I would like to start this with a quote of a woman that I highly respected and liked, Susan Sontag, who said once that I haven't been everywhere, but it's definitely on my list. So, Alan, why do we travel? What do you think?
Well, this is well, thank you, Tal, for that introduction. This has been a topic of interest for me for most of my life, actually. I've grown up traveling and have traveled more than probably almost anybody I know in my department, at least, and even at my university. And that's basically what I do. I do research on travel and tourism, or at least I did before I retired. And so this has always been, and I remember even some of my earliest papers, I had this question, why travel? What is it? You know, if you would get a group of people, I was in this little workshop at my university a few years ago. And the question came up, well, if you weren't doing this, what would you do? And of the half dozen, 8 people who were there, every single one of them said they would be traveling somewhere in the world. And so why travel? It's something that's in the human DNA, I think, is this desire to travel. Now, mostly, you know, from an academic perspective, there are a lot of different models as to motivation, why people travel, visiting friends and relatives, you know, getting away from the mundane workaday world that they live in. there are a lot of these different models, and I'm not saying that any of them are bad. They're all probably very good for the purposes that they were designed for, which is basically how to sell a product, how to package a product, how to put it on the market. And I've done a little bit of work in that, but it's not really what I'm talking about when I talk about why we travel. What I want to know is, why does travel even exist? There's David Chalmers, this philosopher. He has these ideas. He proposed famously that trying to understand how consciousness works is easy compared to understanding why consciousness exists. Why are we even conscious? We can try to figure out how it works, but why is it there? That is considered the hard problem of consciousness. And in terms of in terms of travel motivations, trying to figure out why people say they travel and what they are looking for when they travel, that's the easy question of why travel. The hard question is, why does travel exist? And so that's something that I've been exploring. I think it was about 2015 was the International Year of Global Understanding. All of the major scientific organizations in the world were focused on global understanding for the year. I'm pretty sure it was 2015. And so I organized a session at a conference in Beijing that year on travel and tourism and global understanding. And I put together my first paper on this topic at that time. And it was basically, my idea was, we travel to learn about the world. It's another way that it kind of supplements what we learned at the university. In all the books, we learn all this other stuff. And it was pretty basic, actually. It's when I look back on it now, it's very, very simplistic. But then over the years, I've been getting more and more thinking about this. And so what I believe, the reason we travel is because the planet, because humankind needs to develop a sense of global consciousness. We live in a planet that is constantly shrinking. Okay, so at least prior to the pandemic, travel and tourism has been growing like crazy. Every year, it just, nothing seems to stop it. 9/11 slowed it down a little bit, but didn't stop it. And every year it just grows and grows. And that's because we have a growing middle class around the world, even though people complain, about the income inequalities and stuff. The middle class has grown phenomenally over the last half century. We have technology now that connects everybody. Everybody knows everything that's happening around the world. So the world has gotten smaller in that way. Transportation travel has gotten cheaper and cheaper. In the cruise industry, as well as airlines travel, it's almost easier to travel internationally by airplane pre-pandemic than it was to get in your car and go somewhere. And so the world has just gotten so much smaller. Every corner of the planet's been made accessible. This is known at my academics as space-time compression. Basically, space and time are getting smaller. It's faster and faster to go from one place to another. The time it takes to go from one place to another is faster and faster. And this is mostly driven by technology, transportation technology, telecommunications technology. And that has been an amazing opportunity for those of us who like to travel, which is, like I said, almost everybody. No, it's not everybody, but it's almost everybody, to be able to do that. But at the same time, it has brought on a world with a lot of problems, new problems, the global climate change, biodiversity loss, the damage that's being brought on our oceans from overfishing activities. And so we're facing these huge environmental as well as social and cultural. I mean, language losses are just also exploding. Minority languages are just disappearing like crazy across the planet. So there's globalization is happening. We're taking advantage of it, but we're also experiencing a lot of problems. And so I suggest that one of the reasons why we're experiencing the problems is because our consciousness, our awareness, our brain, our mind has not been able to keep up with the advances of technology. Technology has advanced far further than our politics, than our social systems, and our educational systems are able to manage that. And so when I talk about global consciousness, that's what I'm talking about, is how do we create a human brain, a human mind, a human way of viewing and being in the world that is on par with these incredible technological advances that have made our world so much smaller, so that we can manage those technological advances. And so travel and tourism is one way to do that.
Yeah, I'm listening and I'm thinking, had we been, and that thought, I must admit, comes to me many times. Had we been two Greeks sitting 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and talking about pretty much the same thing, we would have probably said very similar things. We would probably not have been aware of us destroying the planet, or time-space compressions, and whatever technology we could have discussed at the time. But the changes that we have all gone through as human beings over millennia are, in that sense, very tiny. We love for the same reasons, we hate for the same reasons, we laugh for the same reasons, we cry for the same reasons. We're the same people in that sense. So our psychic has not been altered too much because of technology. What has been altered, I would think, is the way we experience what we experience. And I take that from a very personal experience. I've spent over a decade building ArtLink at the time, with the challenge of building the world's first segment for young and emerging artists. Doing on average, I don't know, you say you travel a lot, doing on average 123 flights a year for a decade in 44 countries. And I spent my time pretty much selecting, interviewing artists. My assistant told me that there's on average about 4,000 of them a year, and seeing art through the eyes of their makers. That meant that there were days that I would do 3 countries in a day. I would wake up in one and go to sleep on the third. And summers in Europe, I even managed to do 4. And the experience I went through is I had no seasons, no holidays, no days of the week. There were dates, and that was pretty much it. It could be that the weather completely changed on me one day to the other, and it kept on going. And I would wake up in the morning in a hotel somewhere and watch CNN just to know what's going on in the world, because I had no idea. And then spend the rest of the day seeing the world through the bellies of artists. And it gave me a completely different perspective on the world than the one I had before. It's just a different way of looking at our existence. And I think that was maybe the main drive to then go and try to create those stages and give voices to those cultures, because I found that what I'm learning, seeing the world through the eyes of artists all over the world, is what I would have wanted my existence to include. And it's not. And I think that what technology, the same technology you're talking about, does, it allows us to get there. It allows me to even get to that experience on one hand. But what it also does, it allows me to go back those 3,000 years and realize that doesn't matter how fast I go and how far I go and how many cultures I can visit in my lifetime. At the end of this journey, I'm going back inside and I'm seeing how manageable this all is, how internal it all is, how personal this global world is. You're talking, and I love reading about this in your papers. You're talking about global consciousness, but you're also talking about this global sense of place, that maybe this is a drive that we should all aspire for. Can you share more of it with me?
Sure. So when I talk about global consciousness, yes, but global consciousness is really takes place in the individual. I mean, it's not a group of people getting together and saying, you know, this is our consciousness and we're expanding. It's basically the individual. It comes through the individual experience. And we each of us have our own individual experience. You put two people in the same place side by side and they're going to have a different experience because they bring different knowledge, they bring different beliefs about themselves and about the world. And so that's one point. And another point is the world is you know, it's big. I mean, it is totally beyond anything that any one person can ever totally understand. And that's great. I mean, that's why, you know, I love this world because it's so full of surprises everywhere, you know, around the corner from my house, as well as around the corner from the globe for me. You know, there's surprises there. There are things to learn and experience. And so I think that is, you know, that's the really the lesson that I often try to get across, especially when I'm talking to undergraduates, is that we live in this amazing world, but in order for it to be amazing, we have to be open to that. We have to be willing to take some risk. You know, one of the basic models of tourist motivation, in fact, most of the basic models of tourist motivation are based on risk and security. How much risk is the traveler willing to take? How much security are they demanding or wanting? And they want, you know, the problem is they want both. They want some risk, but they also want security. But then different people, you know, slide on that scale in different ways. And so I often, when I'm talking to undergrads, I'm trying to get them to realize how important it is to take risk. Because for me, the most memorable experiences I have as a traveler are those experiences I did not expect to have. They're things that happened because I saw something. I thought, well, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. And I went for it. And I went to look and explore. And suddenly this whole world opened up that I didn't even know existed in the middle of these very famous tourist destinations. Seeing that destination in a totally different light, from a totally different perspective, like what you're talking about with the artists. And so I had collected a number of stories like that I used, especially when I'm asked to talk to undergraduates in tourism programs at universities, and encourage them, you know, about the value of being open to the unexpected. And that's, you know, in many ways, when I think about this, when we talk about this global sense of place, yeah, okay, so what I talked about, we have risk and then we have security. When we talk about places, the destinations we go to visit, we have risk and we have security. And mostly the known tourism world is secure. It's the things you'll find articles on it. In the old days, we had guidebooks that totally focused on that. All the literature about that destination is about that safe, secure, known tourist world. And then that's fine. if that's going to motivate you to get there, that's perfectly fine. And I'm all for wanting to see the Eiffel Tower and everything else as well. But what we often miss, and there are, I know, travel companies that do specialize in surprise, but what we often miss is that surprise, is the unexpected. And to me, that's where the true sense of global sense of place is in that unexpected. You have the marketing sense of place, but the personal sense of place comes from the unexpected.
You know that it's interesting. I've been to the edges of the world. I've been to places that are definitely not considered safe. But I think that one of the strongest impacts that travel always had on me is reaffirmation. More than seeing new things, unexpected and unknown, is that when I did encounter those unexpected, sometimes risky, definitely unknown experiences, what it did is it reaffirmed something in me. It always gave me something that when I usually not, of course, it doesn't happen at the time you experience. It's when you talk about this, when the narrative comes, when you try to put things in words later on, you realize that you have actually been all the way out there just to get something inside yourself be reaffirmed, be better understood, be given words to be spoken about. And if I understand correctly, when you're saying that global consciousness is very individual in that sense, it happens in our own psyche, that the global sense of place is exactly that, is whatever you create inside yourself while you travel, is while you go through those experiences and then try to explain them to yourselves or to others. Is really that what you capture as a global sense of place, or is it more of a sharing type of an experience that you just exchange with others and that becomes global sense of place?
No, so I think you phrase it in a very good way. And the way I would slightly tweak that, and perhaps this is a more spiritual kind of perspective, is that we already contain the world within ourselves. I mean, we're born on this planet. Everything in our physical body is part of this physical planet. Maybe we have a soul that comes from somewhere else, but everything else about us is embedded totally within this physical planet. And some people say, that the planet is us. There really is no difference between us and the planet, even though our egos tend to try to divide us in many ways. But really, so the way I would look at it in terms of what you were saying is that when we go to a place and we experience the unexpected, that's basically opening the doors to ourselves. It's opening ourselves when it's because it is simply because it is unexpected. That means it's like peeling a layer of our own internal identity, who we are. We're discovering ourselves. As we discover the outside world, we're discovering who we are. As we discover something new in the outside world, we're looking at a new aspect of ourselves. We're learning something new about ourselves. I actually wrote an article just fairly recently titled "Explore the World, Explore Your Mind." And it's the whole idea that the world is your mind. And as you explore new places in the world, you are exploring new corners of your own mind. And so that is the feeling that you get of coming home, of coming home to something within yourself, because yes, it all is within yourself. It's just we're so taken up by our day-to-day lives that we forget about these things. And so there are many different ways that we seek to try to discover these parts of ourselves. Travel and tourism is one. Meditation practice, different kinds of drugs. A lot of ayahuasca is real popular these days to discover yourself. And so there's all these different ways that we do that. But travel and tourism is considered the safest, it's considered the most prestigious way to do it because everybody wants to do it and they envy you if you get to go to some exotic place. And so when you come back, when you're telling the story, you're basically integrating that experience, that new awakening within yourself of who you are. And so, yes, exactly, that's exactly it. I mean, we're coming home. Well, as we go out into the world, we're coming home into ourselves at the same time. And that's another.
That's an interesting angle, because we are talking in a cruise ship conference. And one of the things that I found fascinating traveling by ships is the fact that, unlike when you travel by car or you travel by plane, and the world becomes very small, and the changes are the pace of the changes is very rapid, and you hardly able to reflect while you go through the experience. You leave the reflection until you come back, like you say, you come back home. When you travel by ship and there's that extended time of moving from point A to point B, and you visit a destination, but then you go back to the ship, and then again there are a few hours or days before you get to your next destination. You have time to reflect while traveling. And this is a very interesting way of travel. On the one hand, it is safe and organized and orchestrated, and you're taken to places and you're taken back from places. You don't have to go. On the other hand, it's not always about the extreme nature of the experience. It's more about the way you reflect on it, the time that you're given to be able to reflect on an experience that makes it unique, makes it strong, makes it memorable. You know that the 80s, I remember those buses with the Japanese tourists going everywhere, and you'd see the tourists pouring out of the bus and just not looking at anything except through the lenses, just clicking everything and then going back to the bus. And I remember that when I first encountered it, first and second and third time probably, it always looks very bizarre to me that all those people just get off the bus, they don't look at anything, they don't talk, they don't do anything except capturing images and then going back on the bus and continue. And it took me years to understand that in that culture, you actually travel when you're back home. When you take out those, at the time they were not digital, right? They were actually those pieces of paper. When you take those photographs out and you share it with your friends, with your family, and talk about your experience, that's when you travel. That's when the experience happens. So to that extent, the ability of ships to take you to places and give you that time for reflection is a very unique way of traveling. And you're talking about consciousness altering, right? We've discussed that before, and consciousness expanding as part of what tourism or the tourism industry offers potential tourists as a legal way of consciousness altering. I think that it's more of maybe the expanding than the altering in what I'm describing, but that idea of being able to choose an experience to alter your consciousness I think, is a luxury, is a privilege. Not just it is a commercial activity on the side of those who sell it to you, but for yourself as the one who makes the choice to go there, like for yourself as the one who makes the choice to snap a photo and then travel when you get back home. This is a privilege. In your writing, I wasn't sure if I was sensing it as a criticism about the tourism industry offering that opportunity, or is it an observation that is just a very interesting angle of looking at what the industry is offering?
So I'm not sure I understand your question, whether or not I see travel and tourism as a privilege.
No, it's more,
or the
how do you
privilege.
see the consciousness altering as offered by the industry? Is this
Okay. So a lot of my friends who are tourism scholars write about tourism all the time. They are very critical of travel and tourism as, you know, being kind of exploitative of destinations and of people and offering products that are kind of superficial. I actually am not like that. I actually believe well, I think that's true at a certain level, but I think fundamentally it is not true. Fundamentally, my belief is that everybody wants to have this consciousness expanding experience, whether or not they say that, whether or not they feel they ever actually did that, whether or not they actually did a mindfulness type of activity. Everybody wants that, and that's what's driving travel and tourism. That's why that's why we do this, because we need to catch up with technology. Okay, so that's my fundamental belief. And I believe that no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you are going to have an mind expanding experience, whether or not you believe me or not. Now, one of the things that you were talking about at the beginning is the difference between cruise travel and other travel. And he brought to mind this guy I saw interviewed recently. He's a psychotherapist in New Zealand, I believe, but he wrote a book called so I don't remember the title exactly, but he said it's all about the benefits of experiencing expanded space, the space around us. And you can experience that yourself by just putting your hands to the side here, and instead of and then trying to take in everything from hand to hand. And that's kind of a meditation practice. But he also talks a lot about how landscapes do this. One of the reasons we're drawn to these expansive landscapes is because it forces our eyes to go out instead of in. Almost our daily lives, we're almost totally focused in, but landscapes focus us to go out. And I think in the cruises that I've been on, there's nothing like looking out at the ocean to force your eyes to go out. And so, you know, and when you're on those days when you're a day at sea, what else is there to do but eat and maybe go to the casino? Most people don't do that. I find. Eat and look out at the sea and allow your mind to expand. And you may not think, you know, I would guess 99% of the cruise passengers don't think that they're doing meditation, but that is meditation. That is a meditative, mind expanding, mind altering state. It's a state that you're putting your mind into that allows that kind of internal retrospect on who you are, what is your role in life, what are the experiences you're having on this cruise, you know, maybe on previous cruise, maybe you're thinking about all the places you've been to and integrating all of that and really developing that global mindset, global consciousness. And so I think, in other words, I'm saying, I think you're absolutely right that cruises are especially good for that. I don't think I've ever heard of a cruise that really emphasized that in any way. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, especially nowadays in my own mind. But in going forward, that's something that cruise industry needs to consider. but it's true for all travel. And again, you know, 99.9% of travelers are not aware of that, but it is happening.
So if I take us back to the original question, why do we travel? And you've taken it even further and said, well, why travel at all? Why does it exist? And it's not just about why do we leave the safety of our homes and our routines and the life that we may like more or less, and do something else. But it's more of, why is it in our psyche? What is it that pushes us away from the place we are in somewhere else? So if I take us back to that question, after we've touched on global consciousness, on consciousness altering, on that idea of having direct experiences, of not just being, hearing from someone else, but actually discovering it ourselves or experiencing ourselves. I think it was, who was it? Aldous Huxley, I think, said that to travel is to discover that everyone is wrong about other countries. So it's not necessarily, of course, that, but it's the fact that you do it yourself, you experience it yourself. So after so many years of researching and writing about this, why do we travel?
Well, again, there are two different levels. There are those, if you look from a marketing perspective, there are push factors, there are pull factors, there are things that push you out of your home, there are things that pull you to certain destinations. And, there's a lot of research been done based on that, looking at the business of travel and tourism. But for me, nowadays I'm retired and I'm writing and looking more into these spiritual perspectives. And to me, we live in a universe that is expanding. I mean, physics tells us the universe is expanding. Okay, what does that mean? That means it's constantly getting bigger. It's constantly getting new. It's constantly innovating. It's constantly coming up with expanding. We live in an infinite universe that is constantly expanding. So that means there is no end to what is possible. And we are part of that. We're part of this planet. We're part of this universe. And so it's natural for us to expand as well. Individually, culturally, societal, in terms of our societies. We're just in the word expansion is what it's all about. And so travel and tourism is one way that we expand our awareness of our place and our relationship in the world. But as we've said, the more we go out, the more we go in. And so it is both an external and an internal experience. It's both expanding outward and it's also expanding us inward. And my belief is that we cannot not do this. It's just, that's the way it is. The world is constantly new and constantly expanding, and that's just the way life works.
Look how interesting it is. We started with time-space compression, with the world becoming smaller and smaller, and we are ending it with the world expanding and becoming bigger and bigger. And I think
paradox.
That's exactly it. It's this relationship of the inner and outer, of the individual and global, of what is small and what is big, and how do you contain an experience and how do you share an experience. And I've said it before, and I'll probably repeat myself many times, but I think that we don't exist unless we have narratives. Unless we have the narratives we tell ourselves and other people tell about us and we share with others. Otherwise, we're just instruments, to circulate air. So a fundamental need of our existence is the ability to create those narratives, and that really make us who we are. And travel gives us a wonderful way of not just creating narratives, but feeding the narratives we have and reaffirming them and testing them, just putting them to test. You say about yourself that you are this and that, and then you go outside of your comfort zone and you go into the unknown, and it's a test. and you come back and you're that much richer. Your narrative is that much richer with whatever experience you've gone through. I actually have about 27 more questions to put on the table and discuss, but unfortunately we are running out of time. I would like, though, to emphasize that what happened in this pretty short conversation is exactly what I did expect will happen, that we will end up with no answer. The question of why do we travel is so vast in its potential. There's so many angles, and you've described already a number of those, and we've discussed others as well. And I didn't expect to end up with a clear answer, but I think what we've definitely captured is the fact that we go out there in order to get in here. And this is, again, a wonderful privilege. You said it in one of your papers, and it's known data that only a fraction of all people on the planet experience international travel. And even that travel is not always the one that they would have expected, or that they would do, or that they would choose. So for those of us who are that privileged, I think it's a duty to share the meaningful contribution that travel, that going out there gives us. And it was, just to close a talk with someone else's words, it was Chief Seattle who said, "Take only memories, leave only footprints." At the end of our travel, if we take and process those memories, we came out richer. And if we only left footprints, we didn't damage anything on our way. So, Alan, thank you very much.
Welcome.
It's been insightful and interesting. And thank you very much, everybody who's listening. Thank you for tuning in to Seatrade Cruise Talks. Why do we travel? Make sure to sign up for Seatrade Cruise Talk so you can hear the continuation of this mini-series. And for more thought-provoking content, register for Seatrade Cruise Virtual Expedition Cruising. Thank you very much. And I hope to have another chance to speak to you soon, Alan.
Thank you, Tal.